Thank you. All right, so welcome to my talk. We are going to be having a bit of chat today about gamifying operational excellence with a little app that I built. Next. All right, so going over the agenda, we'll first have a look at the problem that I was facing and what we tried to solve with a little bit of an idea of a solution. The solution's a web app, so I've got lots of screenshots we'll go over and a little bit of a tour of the application. Once we finish that, some takeaways and some lesson learned. We'll have a look at the results and then most likely a lot of questions because I'm speaking very quickly. All right, so a little bit about me. I am Danny Lawrence and I like to hack away on problems that aren't actually problems. So I'll fix anything even if it's not broken. I'm a Python programmer, sysadmin from Australia, but currently on loan to LinkedIn in California. And currently I look after a heap of things. A lot of it, that is the jobs, companies, and recruiter systems for LinkedIn, and a host of other things as well. The other thing I like to do is find encoding bugs. And good news, we went ahead and passed, so I've got the little snowman on my badge for this year. All right, so some terms before we really get started, just so we're all on the same page. The first thing I want to go over is operational excellence. So somewhat of a textbooky definition is effective and efficiently delivering information, technology and services by the end users that add measurable value. Reliability excellence is basically doing everything we possibly can in order to have our data served as fast as possible and as predictable as possible. As for gamification, you can basically think of that as stealing things that work in the video game realm and applying them outside of a video game. So applying things in non-game contexts. All right, so some background information. Think of this as your LinkedIn crash course. You might get this on your first day of starting at LinkedIn or during the interview process. It's basically our welcome to LinkedIn. So our services are mostly Java, and there is a lot of them. I myself look after around 100 of them, but that's only a small drop in the ocean. They end up doing a whole lot of things to power LinkedIn. They're very chatty, since it's a service-oriented architecture. Everything is talking to everything all the time. So like I said, I look after around 100 systems, and we have about 300 SREs. So the problem that we were facing, or what started this whole thing. So the first part of the problem is the good and the bad. Basically, good services, bad services. So bad services, they wake me up. They interrupt me, they make me turn off my Spotify, and I have to do sort of interrupt work. I don't really like doing that. Good services, they're the ones that let me sleep. They're the ones that just keep chugging away. They don't need too much attention. They don't interrupt me. They often are forgotten. So sometimes you forget the name of these ones, but you generally remember the name of those bad services. The other problem that we have is what makes a good service at LinkedIn is a moving target. Just because it was a good service a month ago, a year ago, that's not the case anymore. A lot of the times that we're looking at is that our technologies and dependencies, they change over time, and we need to keep ahead of those. So just as a little bit of an example, these are a list of things, well, they're not all of them, unfortunately. It's just things that we've had to change since I've started LinkedIn. So this would be upgrading libraries, migrating, making sure that sort of base containers are at the right level, making sure we're using security properly, migrating from databases and caching services, speeding up systems, setting up error budging, a whole host of things that we need to be updating and changing. But even worse than that, a good service, if you're not checking it all the time, that's going to go ahead and turn into a bad service. If you're not watching it, this will happen to all of the services. But unfortunately for us, it rarely happens the other way around. We don't get the bad services magically turning good and becoming easier to look after. The other problem is you don't really know what is bad until it breaks. So are you 100% certain that all your backups worked in the last 24 hours? Hopefully you are, but if there's a little part of your brain thinking maybe not, then you're in the right place. The other part is knowing why it's bad. It's one thing to have a Nagios alert go off or the red line creep below the blue line, but why exactly is it bad? It's a little bit easier to say, hey, that Jetty 9 bug, if you don't fix that, the closed wait system will sort of fill up, and that's going ahead and going to ruin your weekend. The other thing is that there's a lot of tribal knowledge a lot of the time of knowing how to transition a good service, bad service into a good service, or how to fix things. And even if one team manages to document it, sometimes that's not always shared across all the teams. Oh, that is blank. All right, cool. So there's only one thing we appear to hate more than not having documentation. And unfortunately for us, that's writing documentation. So quick in summary of the problem we're facing, bad services wake me up, I like to sleep and I like my weekends. Good services turn bad, I don't know how or why it's bad, and a lot of the times I'm not too sure how to fix it. So what we came up with was something called the Service ScoreCard, a little solution to try and help those problems. So the idea that we had was basically take a list of all the things that make one of our good services and write down like a list of requirements so we know what things, what attributes are good, what attributes are bad. And we did that for all the services that we have. Next thing we did was apply a weight to each thing. So something like making sure TLS is configured, really, really important. Making sure that smaller parts, like minor patch versions of dependencies, not so important. Then the tricky bit, we went ahead and codified all those requirements into checks. So you can think of this as writing Nagios plugins for all the little bits and pieces that we'd want to check. Most of the time they end up just being sort of checks of configuration files and JSON files and things, so it's not too bad. Once we had all those requirements, the next thing was to do is go ahead and execute all those checks for all the services that we had, basically working out if they passed or failed. Here's where it starts to get interesting. We tally up the score that we have, having those weights. So more important things, more points, less important things, less points. And we come up with two numbers, your achieved score that you have, and then the maximum possible score that you have. And then we take those numbers and turn it into percentage, and then off a percentage, we go ahead and turn that into a grade. So think back to maybe university or high school. Your services now have an F grade all the way up to an A+ grade, which has some interesting effects. Then what we do is take all those grades and all those services and push them into a high score system. And then we publish those high scores to the entire company. So now everyone knows how well everyone is doing, where the problems are. There's not many better ways to trigger a conversation about reliability than slapping an F grade on something or someone. So great, we've got this. One of the things you might have thought is everyone picking up pitchforks and coming after me, but that wasn't actually the case. I work with a lot of awesome people, so most of the time the reaction was, how do I transition my F grade to an A+? Or I want to beat the person sitting next to me, which is exactly what we were after. So before we get into the tour, I'll go through what makes a check and then how that sort of fits together. So we have two types of plugins in our system. We have things that will go out and fetch our data, and then we'll have things that will check our data. So we go ahead and fetch as much things as possible. So we'll grab things from SVN, Git, configuration management systems, monitoring systems, build systems, CI pipelines. To bastardize a quote from Dutch, if it listens, we go ahead and fetch it. So then what we do is we grab all that data and we have a giant context object that we can now query. We throw that into cache, and we can use that for a few interesting things a little bit later. And then we have lots of checks that will just look into that caching object and then work out if certain criteria is met. So this makes writing checks really, really simple because all the hard effort of fetching the data is already done. So most of the plugins, there are only 10 or 30 lines of Python code, which is not too bad to try and go after in an afternoon. The checks themselves, super simple. They return a state, true, false, or maybe a percentage of how far maybe something's migrated. A little message to get the person started, and then, if it makes sense, a data object that you might be able to use a little bit later. Quick look at what those plugins actually look like is we give it a tag so we can search on the things later. A little decorator helps register it into the plugin system as well. The next thing we do is we pass in the service name. This can actually be anything. It can be a database name. It's basically just the what you'd use to then look up the part of the whatever source of truth you're going for. Just a simple one here. So we're using the service name to fetch owner information, and then throwing back that, yeah, we were able to successfully fetch it and then build the object. We'd normally have some validation here where if it fetched, it would fail, that sort of stuff, but it's a little bit easier to demo when it's not all that. So then we come on to the check plugins, which they're a little bit easier. So that's what one looks like. Again, we apply a weight, so this is ownership, so we give this 5 points, which will go into our tally. Most of the things we go from a 0 to 20, and then we also have a maximum grade on failure, so that's really useful for security things. So if you fail something, bam, you get an F, no questions asked. Tags, again, for a little bit of filtering later. The next thing we do is provide a wiki page. So it's one thing to tell you that you failed something. It's a little bit nicer if we tell you how to fix it. We pass in that context object and the settings. This can be useful if you've got API keys or any sort of sensitive information. We do a quick check. If that's the case, then we return true. If that wasn't the case, then you get a failure. So putting that all together, so hopefully that sort of goes, the problems that we have there are knowing what's bad, why it's bad, and then how to fix the bad. So let's first have a look at understanding what's bad, and for that, we'll have a little bit of a tour. So this is what we've put together, the landing page. It was called Service ScoreCard for us, and this is the little grading sort of legend here. So A+, you get an A 90 above, and A+ is actually 100%. So what we'll do is I'll throw my last name in the search, give that a search, click that, and I get a bunch of results. So here you can see sort of 3 people that all match that name. That will go ahead and search for departments, teams, services, anything like that. So we get the who owns the systems, groups for what's there. The next bit is who I report to, so that can be useful if you see an F grade and you want to chase that up. The actual, how many grade services or gradables that I have, the grade that I've managed to achieve, so I've got a B, not too bad, and then the score that we have. So there's a few of us Lawrences at LinkedIn, but we'll focus on the middle fellow in the middle, which is me. So if I click on myself, that will take me to my this is my sort of control center. So I get a little bit of a view of how my world is going. We have the same views for teams, departments as well. So in the header, a little bit of information, so sort of proudly displaying my B+. That doesn't sound great, but we make it pretty difficult to achieve that sort of perfect score. A little bit of summary so you can see where your services are at. So most of my stuff is in the middle and a few failures that I need to take care of. A list of services, that's ordered by score. So having a look back into that, there is the groups for a service, the name for a service, the kind of service it is, so sometimes it's service, sometimes it's databases, the grading. This little guy down here, which we'll have a little bit of a look into, he is actually showing an A, but might be transitioning into a B, so it's a little bit of a warning for us. And then a breakdown of the scoring. So that's good. We know what is bad. The next thing is knowing why is bad. So we will focus on that service from before. It's called erg. So we can see that since it is going to have a little bit of a drop, we want to get onto that early. So we'll click on the service, and that shows us the service tag. So now we can have a look in everything to do with this service. Now it's called erg because it's the system, this is actually our Jira ticketing system that we use. So it's called erg because that's the sound that you make when you find something you need to fix. when you're already fixing something else. All right, so back to the results. I can see the service, got my grade, which is good. Here, I show a little graph. It's actually missing from this version, but I assure you it'll be in there soon. These are all the checks that we're doing. So the check themselves, that's all the names. So these would be the little Python plugins that we're writing. How well they're doing, so how many points they're earning out of their pass, out of their weight. Red being a failure, green being a success. And then a little message to sort of get you started if you were wondering what the state was. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at the, So this sort of shows us what we can fix to sort of get our grade up. So the next part of that is the how to fix these things. So looking at that one that has got a failure, we can see that it is showing up red and we are losing some points there. And we're getting a little warning saying that we're going to lose our A grade, which we don't want. So we'll go ahead and click on this message. And that will take us to a wiki page with exactly how to fix that problem. So this lets everyone in the whole company being able to, as long as you have access to the right data, you can fix any of these problems because we've made it really nice and easy to try and go after them. So the sort of things we have is what the check is, why it's important, how long it's going to take you to fix it, and then how it will actually be fixed, which is probably the most important. You might have noticed that we use those little brackets around there. The main reason we do that is so when you visit the page from the tool, it'll actually render as the service name, which can make it a little bit easier. So that's what you'll see, the actual service name will be replaced through Confluence. So how, you might ask? Well, that's magic. Of course, magic. So whenever an SRE or an engineer says magic, what it actually means is hacks. And if you're interested in those hacks, I have a lightning talk in about half an hour how those work. But for now, hacks. All right, so let's say I have a look at that check, I do my work, and I fix the issue. I refresh the page, and now I've got that A+ grade. So if any part of you went, I would really like an A+ grade, then this service would probably work because you would want to have that sort of try and do the best thing possible. So hopefully we've solved those problems. We know what's bad, why it's bad, and how to fix them. So the wiki will show us how. So one of the things that this has helped solve is no more of these issues. Hey, I know I received them, which is that, hey, if you're using this version, you quickly need to upgrade it, because otherwise you're affected. This will end up triggering a whole bunch of thoughts. How many of my services are affected? How do I fix this thing? Do I need to upgrade? How actually important it is, and how long is it going to take? Now we know exactly how many services we have. So this is a little bit of an overview. This is showing all the things we're checking and what percentage we've got completed. So that upgrade of that core library is, we've only got one service that needs fixing. So I'll get a little bit of work when I get back to the office, I guess. So we might skip this bit because I'm running out of time. So some of the results and outcomes of this. So what do we do with these scores? We've spent all this work. The first thing we wanted to do is just get the scores higher. We know that the checks are important, so if we work on the checks, we hopefully will get more reliable services. So that said, when we started this effort, we were doing rather poorly, sort of Fs across the board. We're now the services that are looking a little bit greener. You probably would have expected that to be 100%, but we've actually increased the number of things we sort of check. So it was 15 when we started, now it's over 40. And we're adding checks all the time. So now we're exploring new ways to use these scores. So we've gone down the carrot and the stick model. This is what we're thinking. So basically, if it's good, to try and incentivize you, we'll try and give you things. If it's bad, we'll take things away, basically. So one of the things we thought was no SRE support for F-grade services. So now it's, instead of just incentivizing that competitiveness, we're actually going to take it away unless you meet a certain bar. The other thing is F-grade services generally cause the most amount of problems for us. So maybe we want to flip that around and say there's no deployment moratorium if you've got an A+. That can help try and motivate you getting a little bit higher. Because those A+ services generally cause the least amount of problems. The other thing is maybe A-grade or B-grade services you can deploy 24/7 because they're generally more reliable. Or premium SRE support for A+ services. I don't know what premium SRE support is, but it was an idea we had. One of the things you'll find in every single company is everyone will complain that the build processes are slow. So we thought priority build service queues for the good services. The other thing is we could have a look at creating tiger teams to go after those F-grade services. Maybe it's a sign that that team is overworked, or they might not have the know-how to go after it. So we could sort of like send a group of people that have achieved those results and just plop them into other teams. The other thing we can do is sort of run hack days and sort of like bring a whole bunch of people into a room, sort of provide some free beer and sort of hack away on your score. Because in my experience, basically any problem can be solved if you're offering free beer or free food, or free t-shirts, and even stickers. These were fun to make. Designs actually takes a lot longer than I would have thought. The other thing we're thinking is maybe this is something that we use to influence headcount. If there is a team that's sort of struggling with sort of getting their grade to a certain point, that we can, maybe they need a little bit more of assistance. And it just overall helps us to get things done in a simpler way. So some takeaways and lesson learned. So hopefully you can take some of these away, maybe some conversations with your team when you get back to the office. Is what we found is everyone cares about reliability. Everyone is SRE at heart in an organization. You just need to empower them to be able to fix the problems. And by showing them where the problems are and how to fix them, we really saw that happen. The other thing is hack days are super important. The proof of concept for this was put together in an afternoon. It's now sort of a larger virtual team of people working on it and one person full-time, but the initial thing was all out of a hack day. The next thing was getting the data was actually easy. Finding interesting things to do with the data, that was a little bit harder, and we're constantly sort of reevaluating what we do with the data. The last thing there is make it as easy as possible to do the right thing, because if people generally do the easiest thing, and if that happens to be the right thing, then the organization and the services will basically move forward in the right direction. Cool, that's all I had. Thanks.